Have you ever been called a bad luck in your own family? Have you ever heard your own child tell you that your presence was unwanted, as if everything bad that happened was your fault? I have. And it wasn't just anyone who said this to me. It was the boy I raised with so much love, the child for whom I sacrificed entire nights of sleep, whom I fed, clothed, and educated, even when money was tight. The same son I held so often now looked at me coldly and said, "Mom, every time you show up, something goes wrong." Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt your heart shatter into 1,000 pieces and yet you couldn't react? My name is Hazel. I'm 74 years old, and throughout my life, I've always believed that family was my greatest treasure. It was in my children's laughter, in the smell of food cooked on the table, in the tight embrace of my grandchildren that I found the strength to carry on. I never imagined that one day I would be seen as a burden, as bad luck, as if my mere presence could ruin a party. But that day, at my grandson's baptism, that's exactly what happened. I prepared so lovingly. I chose my most beautiful dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I wrapped the gift carefully, thinking about little Ethan's smile when he grew up and could see how much his grandmother loved him from the beginning. But before I could even walk through the church door, my own son, David, stopped me. He didn't hug me. He didn't smile. He simply said, "You're not coming in. You're bad luck, Mom. You'd better stay home." At that moment, I felt my legs weaken. The dress felt heavier than my entire body. The gift I held burned in my hands, as if it were made of iron. Shame covered me like a shadow. How could I explain to the people passing by, glancing out of the corner of their eyes, that I wasn't welcome at my own grandson's christening? How could I justify my son's cold gaze, as if I were a nuisance, a stain on his happiness? My heart pounded, not with anger, but with pain. Deep pain, the kind we never forget. Have you ever felt this way? Being in a place where you should be celebrated, but being treated as if you were invisible? As if all your past sacrifices, sleepless nights, and tears hidden behind smiles were worth absolutely nothing? Because that's exactly how I felt. Invisible. Humiliated. As if, suddenly, the story of my life had been erased. I, who had carried my son in my arms so many times, was now left outside a church, like a stranger. As he turned his back on me and walked inside with his wife and baby, I stood there, standing, alone. The sound of church bells rang, and I heard people laughing, celebrating, singing. Inside, my family smiled for photos, received blessings, began a new chapter. And I, on the outside, was the torn page, the part of the story no one wanted to remember. A grandmother who suddenly no longer had a place. It's difficult to even put into words what I felt. The humiliation was so great it felt like it was cutting through my skin. But at the same time, there was something inside me that wouldn't go out, a silent flame, small but firm. Because, even though the whole world said I was unlucky, I knew the truth was different. I knew how hard I had fought, how much I had given, how much I deserved to be there. And even though I choked back tears in that moment, what no one knew was that that wouldn't be the end of my story. It was there, outside that church, that I began to understand that life always takes turns. And when we least expect it. I wasn't born with much, but I've always been certain that my wealth ran in my family. My name is Hazel, I'm 74 years old, and throughout my life, what gave me strength wasn't great material achievements, awards, or public recognition. It was something much simpler. Being close to the people I loved. From an early age, I learned that life could be hard, but that the warmth of a home filled with laughter could make even the hardest days bearable. And so I dedicated myself, without complaint, to making this home my temple of happiness. My routine was modest, but full of meaning. I woke early to make coffee, spent the day taking care of the house, sewing, cooking, always with the idea that every small gesture was a form of love. I was proud to see my children well fed, to send my son to school with a clean uniform, to be remembered as the mother who never let anything go unnoticed. These weren't great achievements in the eyes of the world, but they meant everything to me. And when my grandchildren arrived, it felt like my mission had been completed. Being a grandmother was like receiving a divine gift, a second chance to relive the joy of childhood, now without the previous rush. I was at every family event, whether it was a simple backyard birthday party or a Christmas gathering, always with a plate of food in hand, always ready to capture a memory. "Hazel never misses," they'd say. And I smiled, because it was true. It didn't matter if it rained, if my body ached, if I was tired. I showed up. My presence was my way of saying, "You are my life." But the hidden truth, which I would only realize much later, is that those who give their all don't always receive in kind. While I believed I was building indestructible bonds, others saw my efforts as something obvious, automatic, as if I were just part of the scenery. And this became increasingly clear behind the scenes of family life. Small comments, looks I pretended not to notice, jokes that hurt more than they seemed. I, who thought I was the foundation of that family, was gradually being pushed into the role of an extra. Still, I persisted. Because for me, being a grandmother was the greatest joy. It was in Ethan's smile, my grandson, that I found the meaning to carry on. It was when I held his tiny hand that I felt all the sacrifice had been worth it. I just wanted to be close to them, share my happiness, leave a legacy of love and dignity. What no one knew was that behind my constant presence were also nights of heavy silence, when I wondered if they were truly happy to have me around or if they tolerated me out of obligation. This doubt gnawed at me, but I pushed it from my mind, preferring to believe that the love I felt was enough to sustain everything. And therein lies the irony of life. We give so much, believing we're building a fortress of affection, but suddenly discover cracks we can't ignore. I experienced this revelation firsthand. It was as if all my life's effort had been put to the test in a single instant. And the pain came not just from exclusion, but from the feeling that perhaps my dedication wasn't having the impact I imagined. Even so, there was something inside me that I wouldn't give up. A small but firm flame that reminded me that my journey wasn't over yet. I wasn't just the grandmother who brought food, who was present in photos, who took care of everything silently. I was more. And life, with its harsh way of teaching, was about to show me how far this strength could take me. And it was in this contrast between the love I bore and the coldness I received, between the dignity I defended and the humiliation I faced, that my story took an unexpected turn. A turn that, to this day, reminds me that nothing is definitive when it comes to family and that, behind every gesture, there is always a truth waiting to be revealed. At first, I tried to laugh it off, like someone who didn't care. "When grandma comes, the rain doesn't stop," they'd say, and everyone burst out laughing. I smiled along, pretending it was just a harmless joke. But inside, each word felt like a nail slowly driving home, unnoticed. In that moment, I told myself it was nothing, just a family joke. But the hidden truth is that, behind that laughter, something began to change inside me. A strange feeling, as if I'd suddenly lost my welcome. And the comments didn't stop there. "Hazel, you're a jinx. Something always happens when you're around." At first, I'd respond lightly, trying to deflect. "Oh, if everything that went wrong were my fault, the world would have ended a long time ago." But with each repetition, each time the same joke came up in different meetings, the pain grew. What once seemed like a casual comment began to morph into a label. And I was no longer Hazel, the loving grandmother, the devoted mother. To them, I was the bad luck, the shame hidden between the lines of the meetings. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in a place where you should have felt at home, but instead of hugs, you received sidelong glances, muffled giggles, and loose phrases that carried more venom than humor? This is the worst form of loneliness. Being surrounded by people and still feeling completely alone. I'd come home from these meetings with a lump in my throat. The walls of my room seemed to hear me better than my own family. I'd sit on the edge of my bed and wonder, is this really how they see me? Have I become a burden, someone better left alone? The mindset that had always sustained me, believing in the value of family, in the impact of silent love, was beginning to crack. And I didn't know how to react without appearing weak, without giving them the victory of seeing my tears. But behind every gesture of mine lay an entire journey of sacrifices that no one seemed to remember. The backstage of my life was made up of sleepless nights, difficult decisions, choices that always prioritized others over myself. And that was exactly what hurt, realizing that this history of dedication, which I carried like a badge of honor, was now being ignored. Sometimes, when I was alone, the memories came flooding back. I saw myself younger, rushing from one place to another to take care of the house, work, and bills. I remembered the joy in my son's eyes when he received his first gift, bought with my sweat. I recalled Sunday dinners, when I would gather everyone around the table, believing nothing could separate us. And today, this same family I helped build called me unlucky. It was a cruel revelation. These comments began to loom large even in the smallest details. If it was raining on a party day, someone would make a point of saying, "It's because Hazel is here." If the food burned, the comment soon followed, "It's Grandma's bad luck." With each word, I felt more invisible, as if everything I represented had been reduced to an unfair caricature. And little by little, that began to change not only the way they saw me, but also the way I saw myself. The impact this had on my soul was devastating. I began to question whether I truly had any value, whether all my history of sacrifice had been worth it. I tried to maintain my composure, continued helping, cooking, showing up to every meeting, but I wasn't the same anymore. Inside me, there was an open wound that no one saw because I didn't let it show. It was my silent vulnerability. And it was precisely in this fragility that something began to emerge. A different strength, one I couldn't yet name, but which was growing within me. It was as if each humiliation, without me realizing it, was paving the way for a transformation. I didn't yet know how or when, but I felt that life was leading me to a greater revelation. And as I choked back tears, silently guarded my pain, and watched my own family drift away, I never imagined that the next scene in my life would be even more painful. A scene capable of brutally exposing everything I secretly feared, and that would forever change the way I saw myself and how they saw me. I'll never forget the sound of his voice that day. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't an outburst, it was worse. It was spoken in a low, almost cold tone, as if communicating something already decided. "Mom, you're not going to the baptism. We don't want anything to go wrong." Those words entered me like a thin, silent blade, cutting without immediately revealing the blood. I stared at him, waiting for some sign of teasing, a hesitation, anything that would show he didn't really mean it. But there was none. My son's face was firm, resolute, as if my exclusion were the most natural choice in the world. I remained silent. I swallowed the tears burning in my throat, knowing that if I let a tear escape, he would see how he had destroyed me inside. And I didn't want to give him that power. I took a deep breath, trying to appear strong, but inside I felt like I was crumbling. In that moment, everything I had heard before, the jokes, the comments, the sidelong glances, suddenly took on weight. They weren't jokes, they weren't my exaggerations. It was real. He truly believed I was unlucky. And he believed it so much that he didn't want me to be present on one of the most important days of his life. When I got home, I looked at the dress I'd already set aside days before. It was blue, with small flowers, delicate, the kind we save for special occasions. I'd ironed it with care, folded it neatly, ready to be worn with pride. Beside it was the gift I'd bought for my grandson, a small locket engraved with a prayer, to protect him throughout his life. I imagined that when he grew up, he'd keep it as a reminder of the grandmother who was always there. But now, all that seemed meaningless. The dress was nothing more than a piece of fabric. The gift, a reminder of a presence that would never be allowed. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the locket between my fingers, and felt the weight not of the object, but of abandonment. How could a son look at his own mother and see her as a threat, as a risk, as someone who needed to be kept out? It was as if my entire past had been erased in seconds. The nights sewing his clothes, the days I'd skipped meals so he'd have enough, the times I'd dressed in courage to protect him from everything. None of it mattered anymore. All that remained was the cruel label of unlucky. Have you ever experienced that feeling of being discarded? Of looking at something you've prepared with so much love and realizing you won't have the chance to experience that moment again? This is a kind of loneliness that's not easily explained. It's like being alive, but erased. As if I were a ghost within my own family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. With each thought, a new question arose. At what point did my son stop seeing me as a support and start seeing me as a burden? What decisions, what mindset had he developed to believe something so cruel? And most importantly, what had I done so wrong to deserve this? The silence in the room was heavy. I could even hear the sound of my own heart beating rapidly, caught between anger and sadness. On one hand, there was an almost suffocating revolt, the desire to scream, to demand respect. On the other, there was a deep pain, the realization that perhaps nothing I said would change his opinion of me. This revelation was unbearable. As dawn broke, I got up and put on the dress I had prepared. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at myself for a few minutes. I wanted to see what he saw. Did I really look unlucky? Were my wrinkles, my gray hair, my very presence, signs of something bad? All I saw was a tired woman, yes, but still standing. A woman who had given everything for that family and yet was being rejected. It was in that moment, looking at myself, that I understood the impact of that situation. It wasn't just about not going to the baptism. It was about being erased from the story I myself had helped write. It was about being pushed out of a place that should have been rightfully mine. And this hidden truth, harsh and cruel, became impossible to ignore. I folded the dress back up and put the gift away in a drawer. My heart was heavy, but my mind was spinning with thoughts I hadn't expected. A flame was burning inside me, something beginning to transform. Because I knew that wouldn't be the last word in my story. And although I didn't have all the answers yet, something inside me told me that what came next would change everything, including how my son saw me. I just didn't know yet how this journey would unfold. As I put the dress back in the drawer, memories dragged me back to a distant time when my life revolved around keeping my son on his feet. I could hear the whir of the sewing machine in the silence of the early morning, that metallic sound mingling with the tiredness of my body. I spent entire nights sewing clothes for neighbors, acquaintances, anyone who needed an alteration, because every penny counted. The dim light from the lamp hanging over the table illuminated my already scarred fingers, but my mind was focused on something else, my boy's future. It was for him that I endured the back pain, the sleep deprivation, and my hands trembling from holding needles and fabric so much. I told myself it didn't matter how much I suffered, as long as David had what he needed. It was with this silent effort, hidden in the shadows of life, that I was able to pay for his education. While so many other children dropped out of school, my son continued because I was there, supporting his steps with my sacrifice. I knew he had no idea how much of an impact this had on my daily life, but I didn't need him to know. A mother's love demands no payment. I also remember a specific birthday, when he was still young. I didn't have the money for big gifts, and the party he dreamed of seemed impossible. But I didn't accept that limitation as a sentence. I spent weeks sewing extra clothes for neighbors, selling small cakes I baked in the wee hours, scraping together coin by coin until I could buy the simple decorations and the cake he so desired. The night before the party, I was still awake, hanging balloons, improvising little banners with scraps of fabric left over from sewing. The result may not have been lavish, but when I saw David's eyes light up as he walked into the living room and found his friends waiting, I felt all the effort had been worth it. That was my mindset back then, to turn lack into abundance, pain into laughter, hardship into silent achievements. Every decision I made carried a single goal, to give my son the best I could. I've always believed that true love is proven in the details, in the things no one sees, but that forever mark the life of the recipient. And today, that same boy, the same one who ran around the room with his eyes lit up at a simple party, is the one who calls me unlucky. This contradiction eats away at me. It's as if the hidden truth of my life has been erased, replaced by a cruel and distorted version. Suddenly, my entire story of sacrifice seemed invisible, and all that remained was the caricature he chose to believe. As these memories came flooding back, I couldn't help but wonder, How can someone forget where they came from? How can I so easily erase the nights I spent awake, the tears I hid, the smiles I forced just so he'd have the courage to move on? It's a painful revelation to discover that, no matter how much we've given our all, some people only see what they want to see. But even as this pain pierced me, there was also a kind of clarity I had never experienced before. I realized that my journey was not just about sacrifice, but about transformation. Every wound, every sacrifice, every humiliation I suffered now showed me a different reflection. I wasn't weak, I wasn't unlucky. I was the woman who supported an entire house with her own hands. I was proof that love and courage can shape destinies. This realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a new perspective. It was as if I could suddenly see the behind the scenes of my own life with new eyes. The impact of everything I'd done wasn't measured by the words my son was saying now, but by the roots I'd planted. And even if he didn't recognize it, those roots were there, sustaining far more than he could have imagined. Still, it was impossible not to feel the weight of injustice. I lay at night with these memories as my companion, weaving together past and present, trying to understand where the thread of our relationship had broken. Images of impromptu parties, hand-washed uniforms, silently shared bread, all came flooding back like a film that kept playing in my head. And in contrast, the recent scene of my son blocking me at the church door became even more cruel. I didn't have ready answers, but I knew something was stirring inside me. It was as if life, through these memories, was pushing me toward a new decision. I still didn't know what the outcome would be, but I sensed that the path opening before me wouldn't be just tears. There was a growing force, a flame I could no longer ignore. And it was with this weight of memories and revelations that I realized that what was to come wouldn't be just another disappointment. It would be a turning point, a moment capable of redefining everything I believed about myself and my own family. The day of the baptism arrived like an open wound. While the city woke to celebration, with bells ringing and joyful voices echoing in the distance, my house seemed increasingly silent, suffocating. The dress I had prepared remained folded on the chair, a cruel reminder of what I would never experience. I sat on the edge of the bed and remained there, motionless, trying to swallow the weight of a reality I had not chosen. Through the window, I could hear movement in the distance. Laughter, hurried footsteps, the sound of cars parking near the church. Each sound was like a slow stab, reminding me that my presence had been denied. While everyone celebrated, I was alone. I stared at the walls of my house and wondered when everything had turned this way. Was all my love in vain? The question rang out relentlessly. Had every sleepless night, every difficult decision, every choice to give up been lost to time, erased as if it had never existed? It was as if my entire life story had been reduced to a single, unfair label: bad luck. And in that heavy silence, I began to mentally revisit every scene of my journey. I remembered the first day I took my son to school, holding his hand tightly so he wouldn't be afraid. I remembered the nights when, even when sick, I would get up to prepare his food, knowing he depended on me. I remembered the times I stood by, like an invisible shield, protecting him from hardships he couldn't even imagine. All of that now seemed to have been erased by a cold sentence spoken at the church door. The hidden truth, which no one there saw, was that while they laughed and celebrated, I was fighting the hardest battle of my life within my own heart. It was the clash between two realities. On one side, the memory of who I was and what I represented. On the other, the explicit rejection of the one who should have been the continuation of my love. The impact of this was not only emotional, it was spiritual. I felt diminished, almost non-existent, as if I had lost not only my place in the family but also my role in the world. Time seemed to stand still. I heard the music coming from the church and suddenly imagined the scene. My son holding the baby, smiling, the guests taking photos, everyone celebrating that unique moment. And I, the grandmother, was outside, invisible, absent, as if I had never been part of that story. This revelation struck me so strongly that I had to hold back tears. The tears fell, but silently, because even when I suffered, I had learned to keep quiet. There was something cruel about that loneliness. It wasn't just the physical absence at the ceremony. It was the symbolic weight of being discarded. The mindset that had always guided my life, the belief that family is everything, that those who sow love reap gratitude, began to unravel before my eyes. How could I accept that the one I'd invested most in now treated me as if I were a threat? How could I deal with the revelation that, for him, my presence wasn't a blessing, but a risk? In this emptiness, I began to talk to myself. Hazel, you can't have lived through all this to end up like this. A lifetime of sacrifices and choices can't be erased by a single thankless decision. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, my heart ached. I saw myself reflected in the windowpane, and the image was of a small, tired woman, her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of rejection were heavier than her own body. With each laugh that echoed in the distance, with each song that pierced the wind, I felt the wound open wider. And it was at that point that the indignation began to grow. Because it wasn't just about me, it was about all the mothers and grandmothers who give everything and, in the end, are discarded as if they were invisible. It was as if I carried not only my own pain, but the pain of all those who have felt the same. The baptism ended, and the street returned to silence. I remained there, sitting, still with the dress within reach, but now without the strength to put it away. Inside me, something broke, but at the same time, something began to blossom. It was a mixture of revolt and clarity, as if life itself were pushing me toward transformation. I didn't yet know how, but I had a feeling that this rock bottom would also be the beginning of a turning point. And that night, when I turned out the lights and went to bed, I realized something had changed. I was no longer just the rejected Hazel, the grandmother forbidden entry. I was facing a crossroads that would require new decisions, a change of mindset, and, above all, courage. Because this story wouldn't end like this. It was just beginning. As I relived every detail of that day, a mixture of pain and indignation washed over me. It wasn't just the loneliness of the moment, but the feeling of being ripped from a place that was rightfully mine. And it's impossible not to think of how many others have gone through something similar. How many mothers, how many grandmothers, how many fathers have also been treated as if they were invisible after giving their all. This is a wound that doesn't heal on its own, and that's why I want to open space here for something important. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell me what bothered you most. Maybe you've experienced something similar, maybe you've seen it happen to someone close to you, or maybe you just feel that such an injustice hurts even those who only hear it. I want to hear your perspective, because when you share your experiences, this space stops being just about my voice and becomes a community of real stories that deserve to be heard. And if this story touched your heart in any way, please like this video. It seems like a small gesture, but it has a huge impact. Every time you press this button, YouTube understands that this message needs to reach more people. People who, often, are going through exactly the same pain and need to feel they are not alone. And if you want to continue following stories like this, subscribe to the channel. This is how we can walk together on this journey of revelations, learning, and truths that are often hidden behind the scenes of life. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more and more hearts that need to hear these words. I say this because I truly believe that every comment, every subscription, every like is like a flame that keeps this message alive. It's what ensures that these stories, which are so often silenced, find a place to resonate. And as I think about this, looking at that dress still draped over the chair, I realize that the weight of my loneliness is no longer just mine. It mingles with that of so many other voices echoing the same pain. And it is precisely then that something inside me begins to shift, a feeling that, however cruel that day may have been, it would be only the beginning of a greater transformation, one that I didn't yet fully understand, but which was already being announced deep in my heart. That night, after the voices in the streets faded and the city returned to silence, I sat at the kitchen table, unsure what to do with the pain that consumed me. The dress still lay there, a silent witness to the humiliation I had suffered. But instead of letting that weight crush me completely, something different was born within me. It was as if a spark of courage had emerged amidst the darkness. I understood for the first time that there was no point in expecting recognition from those who had chosen to forget. If my story wouldn't be told by them, it would be told by me. I grabbed a sheet of paper and a pen. My hands were shaking, I don't know if from anger, sadness, or a new strength beginning to stir within me. I wrote my grandson's name at the top of the page. Ethan. That alone made me cry. I wanted him to grow up knowing that his grandmother wasn't bad luck, wasn't a burden, wasn't a shadow. I wanted him to know the hidden truth about who I really was, about every battle I faced in silence, about every decision I made with the best interests of my family in mind. The words began to flow. I told how I struggled to provide his father with an education, how I overcame fatigue and lack of resources with creativity and faith. I spoke of nights sewing clothes, of impromptu birthdays, of the joy of watching him grow. But I also wrote about the wounds, about the loneliness I felt even surrounded by people, about the comments that hurt me, about the day I was prevented from entering a church to attend his baptism. I wrote with sincerity, without masks, like someone opening the curtains of their own life so that, one day, someone might see the truth. When I finished, I carefully folded the pages and placed them inside a small wooden box. It was a box I already treasured, filled with old family photos. David's first birthday, a Christmas where we managed to buy simple gifts, a short trip to the lake when he was still a child. It was all there, fragments of a journey that showed not only the effort but also the love that sustained us for so many years. I added the letter among those memories, as if it were the final piece of a puzzle that would one day need to be understood. I carefully closed the box and hid it in a special place, away from the eyes of those who might discard it thoughtlessly. In doing so, I felt as if I had made a definitive decision. I would not be erased. One day, Ethan would open that box and discover for himself who his grandmother had been. He would discover that behind the woman accused of bringing bad luck lay a silent warrior who sustained the entire family with love and sacrifice. That revelation wouldn't come now, but I knew its impact, when it did, would be profound. This seemingly simple act brought me a strange sense of peace. It was as if, by recording my truth in words, I had regained some of the dignity they had tried to strip me of. I understood that sometimes the shift in power doesn't happen in grand public gestures, but in quiet moments, when we decide to stand up for ourselves. In that moment, I was no longer the Hazel humiliated at the church door. I was the Hazel who had chosen not to be silent. And yet, the pain didn't completely disappear. It remained there, throbbing, a constant reminder of the rejection I'd suffered. But now, along with the pain, there was also a spark of hope. A certainty that my story would still carry weight, that my voice would still be heard, even if it took years. It was as if I'd found a way to break the silence, to record that I existed, that I loved, that I fought. As I closed the box and put it away, I looked out the window at the sky. The stars were hidden by clouds, but I knew they were there. So it was with my life. Even though hidden by the shadows of ingratitude, the light of truth still existed. I knew that simple gesture could change everything. And although I wasn't sure how things would unfold from then on, the feeling grew within me that this wouldn't be the last revelation of my journey. Months have passed since that day I was left outside the church, like a stranger in my own family. I thought the wound would never heal, but life, with its mysterious way of teaching, brought an unexpected revelation. While I continued to silently try to rebuild my dignity, my son, the same one who called me unlucky and forbade me from seeing his grandson, began to face storms he never imagined. First came the news that he had lost his job. The stability he had always prided himself on simply crumbled. Soon, bills piled up, debts were knocking at the door, and friends who had once been close disappeared like smoke. I heard the comments from afar, noticed the changes in behavior, but I didn't get close. It was as if life were setting up, before my eyes, a scene of silent, almost divine justice. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't my desire. It was simply the law of return showing its strength. Until, one rainy afternoon, I heard a timid knock on my door. When I opened it, I found my son there, head down, eyes red, voice cracking. He hesitated before speaking, but the words finally came out. "Mom, I don't deserve it, but I need your help." That pierced me in a way I can't explain. I saw before me not the man who had humiliated me, but the boy who had so often held my hand, afraid to cross the street. The impact of that scene was profound, because it revealed a truth I already knew. No matter how much he had hurt me, I was still the only person he could trust. I let him in. I sat across from him, silent, waiting for him to say more. And he did. He told me about the hardships, about losing his job, about the despair of not being able to support himself. For the first time in a long time, I saw my son stripped of the arrogance that had hurt me so much. He was broken, vulnerable, and in that state, he returned to the only place he knew he could still find support: home. Inside me, feelings swirled. Part of me wanted to remember every word he'd said to me at the church door, wanted to ask how he could have the nerve to call me unlucky and now come asking for help. But another part, the one that always spoke louder, was the voice of love. The mindset that guided me throughout my life has always been this: when family calls, we answer, even hurt, even with our hearts broken. As he spoke, a phrase echoed in my mind: life teaches. And I knew this moment wasn't just his, it was mine too. It was the opportunity to show that, despite everything, I was still stronger than the cruel words he'd thrown at me. I could have closed the door. I could have said, "Now you know how it hurts." But that wasn't what I wanted to leave as my legacy. The transformation I sought wouldn't come from revenge, but from revealing who I truly was: a mother, a grandmother, a woman who wouldn't allow herself to be reduced to an unfair label. I looked into his eyes and saw tears streaming down his face. He didn't need to say anything else. That cry spoke volumes. It was the recognition that I had made a mistake, that I had been hurt, that I was now dependent on the very person I had scorned. And it was there, in that moment of vulnerability, that I realized the impact of the law of return. Life, in its own time, had taken care of adjusting things, of putting each piece in its place. I took a deep breath before answering. It wasn't easy. My heart was torn between pain and compassion. But I said, "You may not deserve it, David, but I'm your mother. And as long as I have the strength, I won't let you fall." He cried even harder, and I felt that sentence wasn't just an answer, it was a lesson. Because in that moment, he understood that good and bad luck have nothing to do with someone's presence, but rather with the decisions we make, with how we treat the one who gave us everything. As I made him a cup of tea, my mind still whirled silently. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about material help. It was about something much bigger. The impact of the truth finally sinking in. I knew that scene would be forever etched on both my mind and his. And, even without saying it out loud, I was certain that from then on, nothing would ever be the same again. He sat across from me, his eyes still watery, his hands trembling, clutching the teacup as if it were the last anchor in a stormy sea. The silence between us was heavy, yet charged with something different, as if each second were a reminder of words that had already been spoken. I could sense that this was the moment to say what had been bottled up inside me for so long, what I had never dared to speak aloud. I took a deep breath and, without taking my eyes off him, said, "Not cold feet, David. I've always been the warmth that kept this family going. And you only realized it now." The words came out firmly, almost like a whisper, charged with truth. I saw the immediate impact on his face. It was as if he'd suddenly been forced to see behind the scenes of our story, the revelation of something that had always been before him, but which he'd refused to see. He lowered his head, not daring to look me in the eye, and in that gesture I understood that my voice had finally broken through the barrier indifference had built. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to accuse. Justice, in that moment, wasn't revenge, it was clarity. It was the naked truth imposing itself with a force that could no longer be denied. I continued, leaving no room for interpretation. Respect isn't begged for, it's earned. I never asked for anything in return for everything I did for you. But the least I deserved was dignity. Those words echoed in the room like a sentence. There was no turning back. I was no longer asking to be seen. I was demanding that my story be recognized. As I spoke, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if a part of me, which had been cowering for years, had finally found the courage to stand up. I wasn't just the wounded mother, the rejected grandmother. I was the woman who held every stone of this house together, who held every bit of pain and transformed it into life. This realization brought me a strength I hadn't known I still possessed. David wept silently. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. And I realized I didn't need an explanation. Crying was already recognition, already confession. For the first time in years, I felt a role reversal taking place. I was no longer the one justifying myself, the one swallowing tears to keep the peace. I was the one with the final say, and that word wasn't resentment, but truth. The transformation I experienced in that moment was profound. I understood that sometimes life waits for the right moment to give us back what seemed lost. And that was my moment. Not because my son was struggling, but because I finally had the courage to stand before him and say, "I know who I am, and you know it now too." Still, even with all the power my words carried, I couldn't help but help. Because within me, love still spoke loudly. I prepared a simple meal, placed it before him, and silently showed that my heart was not hardened. But there was a clear difference. I no longer remained silent, no longer accepted being treated as invisible. He now knew that if he wanted to walk by my side, he would have to learn to value, not despise. As I watched him eat in silence, I realized how time had transformed us. He was no longer the boy who happily ran through impromptu parties, and I was no longer the mother who sacrificed herself to keep everything afloat. A new mindset was at play. I had discovered the power of my own voice, and he, the consequences of his decisions. This final confrontation wasn't about shouting or accusations, but about revelations. I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. It was enough to show the truth that had always been there. I wasn't bad luck, never had been. I was the flame that lit our family, even when no one noticed. And in that moment, I knew that flame would never be extinguished. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of solitude, but the silence of something that had changed forever. I didn't know what would come next, but I felt that moment was just the beginning of a new phase, one in which I would no longer be erased, but recognized. And within me, the certainty grew that my journey still held more revelations, more hidden truths waiting to surface. When I finally took a deep breath and felt that strange silence in the house, I realized my journey had taken me to a point I never imagined I'd reach. It wasn't just the pain of being rejected, nor even the humiliation of hearing my own son tell me I was unlucky. What lay before me now was something greater, the clear revelation of who I'd always been and how life, even with its harshest blows, never ceases to teach. I looked around and saw so many objects carrying stories. Old photographs, clothes sewn with my own hands, mementos stored in boxes no one opened anymore. It was as if every detail was a reminder that I was always there, that my mark was imprinted on their lives, whether they recognized it or not. And this made me understand that being a grandmother isn't about carrying the weight of a family. It's about being the root that supports each branch. Roots don't appear on the surface, no one sees them, but they are what hold the whole tree upright. I remembered every sacrifice, every silent decision, every battle fought behind the scenes so my family could have what they needed. And while the memory brought tears to my eyes, it also made me proud. Because, deep down, I knew that God saw everything. Nothing escapes his notice. Not the sleepless nights, not the hidden tears, not the injustices suffered. The law of return exists, and I had just seen with my own eyes how it works, unhurriedly, but with precision. At that moment, I lifted my head and looked as if I were looking not only at my son, but also at all those who had ever felt discarded, ignored, or treated like a burden. And it was from deep within my heart that the words came out. Being a grandmother isn't about being a burden. It's about being a root. And those who cut their roots lose the strength of life. The phrase wasn't just for him, it was for myself and anyone who needed to hear it. And that's why I want to speak directly to you now. If this story has touched your heart in any way, write in the comments, "I honor my roots." These words aren't just a stray phrase. They're a declaration of awareness, a reminder that no one gets where they are without the hands that supported them first. Your participation here has an immense impact, because every comment, every like, every subscription to the channel is like a chain of voices joining mine. It's what makes this message reach others who also need to hear that they are not alone. This space we've built together isn't just about a story. It's about creating a community where pain, revelations, and learning come to life. It's about showing that silence doesn't have to be the end, and that transformation can arise even from the greatest wounds. When you share your opinion, when you share your experience, you become part of this journey. And it's like this, step by step, that we can empower voices that were previously ignored. I close my eyes and think about how many people right now are experiencing the same pain I did. Being left aside, hearing hurtful words, carrying the weight of a lifetime without the recognition they deserve. It's for them that I keep speaking. It's for them that this story needs to be told. Because the hidden truth is that no one can take from us who we truly are. As I spoke these words, I felt my voice was no longer just that of a wounded grandmother. It was the voice of someone who found courage in the midst of rejection, who understood that dignity isn't demanded, it's imposed with the power of truth. And deep down, I knew this message didn't end there. It would continue to echo, finding other stories, other lives, other roots that still need to be remembered. If you've made it this far with me, you may have felt, at some point, the same mix of pain and strength that has accompanied me on this journey. That's why I want to invite you to stay close. Subscribe to the channel, because each new story I share here has the same purpose: to touch you deeply, spark reflection, and remind you that we are not alone on this journey. And since you stayed with me until the end, leave the phrase here in the comments: I honor my roots. That way I will know that you walked with me until the last moment of this narrative, and that this message found a place in your heart. Your like is also important, not as a number, but as a sign that this connection we've created resonates with you. It's what keeps the flame alive so that more stories like this can be shared. And if you want to continue with me, there's a video right here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this look at family, choices, and the impact we have on each other. Click and follow me there.